Daniel, thank you so much for your time. Welcome to Sunday Arts.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Wonderful to watch you performing that piece called Divergence, which was from your last album. I'm just curious about the background to that piece. How did that come about?
It's a meditation. You know, it's a way for me to respond not only to hip-hop music, but to this notion of clarity and accessibility in the form and in the music. And as a contemporary composer, you know, these things might be anathema. You know, these things might be dangerous. Accessibility, clarity, that particular piece was my embrace of Philip Glass, my embrace of hip-hop music, and my embrace of a meditative state.
I don't know whether to laugh, to cry, or to bop around crazily in my seat. That sort of emotional response that you get from audiences, is that particularly strong in Divergence?
I think so. You know, it starts off in a kind of expected way. You know, it's the telling of a story that unfolds. But like any great story, I think there's the unexpected. And suddenly the violin is wailing and crying, and there's all these syncopations and changes in pitch and rhythm and scale and register. So yeah, I'm depending on how Win Bennett, my pianist, and I feel at any given moment, because the piece is so clear in its form, it allows us to diverge and to go off into, I like to say, sometimes the afterworld, you know.
Now, I read that when you wake up in the morning, you plug your laptop in, you pull out the violin, and then you just start to compose and to play. Do you just live and breathe music?
Well, let me answer your question this way. Were it not for music, my life would be very different. For me, when I say music changed my life, I am in fact saying music saved my life. Statistically speaking, as a Haitian, African-American composer in America, my life is supposed to be very different. A very actually sad life. Statistically speaking, I'm supposed to have used drugs. I'm supposed to be in jail. I'm supposed to be a derelict, if you will. And I'd like to think, in fact I know, that were it not for playing the violin, were it not for music, were it not for composing, were it not for the collaborations and the cooperation and the conversations that I've had with so many musicians, oh yeah, my life would be very different.
But it can't have always been that easy. I imagine the violin, playing that at school, you know, it's not the coolest thing to pick up when everybody else is playing the trombone or the guitar, you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. I mean, drums, cool. Bass, cool. Electric guitar, very cool. Violin, not quite so cool. So, and by cool now, of course, I mean relevant. So everything that I do with the violin, plugging into effects, plugging into a laptop, working with DJ Spooky or different artists that you wouldn't normally expect would work with a violinist, all of these things is, yes, to be cool, but really it's to be relevant.
So are you saving the violin from destruction, do you think?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, the violin playing and even what I'm doing with the instrument has its tradition. You know, there were a lot of slaves in the antebellum South of the Americas who played the fiddle, you know, and even now there's a wonderful tradition of jazz violin playing that goes back to Isaac Hayes and Barry White and Motown.
If you think about it, young people aren't really flocking to classical performances in a massive kind of way, but you're talking about personalising the violin, personalising the music in such a way that they are coming to your performances in droves. Is that how you do get a sort of a divergence of audiences?
I think that one way to answer your question is to just think about, if we all start thinking about our CD collections or our iTunes playlist, you know, there's probably a little bit of, I suspect, a little bit of classical, a little bit of folk, a little bit of rock, a little bit of that other thing. But the point is, you know, I think audiences generally don't make those kind of distinctions and don't segregate. You know, it's the editors and the administration and people who kind of have to do those things for a living, and it's all for convenience sake. So for me, I'm a composer, I'm a blue-collar composer. You know, I'm a composer not necessarily for the concert hall, but for the dance club. And, you know, my career is modeled on those of Philip Glass, Bjork, and even Midnight Oil, you know.
Are you getting closer to Bjork? Have you met her?
I have not officially met her.
We'll put the call out now because she's coming to Australia in January.
I know, and you know, she is a real musical hero of mine. I think I like to say that she's the world's most famous avant-garde artist and composer. To me, she's a musical goddess, and she's someone that I aspire I think she's someone who aspires to greatness in her own work, and in doing so, she inspires me to aspire to greatness in my own work.
They sometimes say that you shouldn't meet your heroes because you freak out.
It's true, you know. What happens when you meet the person who has made you cry? What happens when you meet the person who has maybe caused you to change the direction you were taking in your life? What happens when that person becomes a friend? You know, as I like to say, I never want to get too close. You know, not to drop names, but Philip Glass calls from time to time, and I'll take out my cell phone and his name appears. And I always wait. You know, the fan in me wants to immediately pick up the phone, but, you know, I even say to Philip, I say, Philip, you know, I don't want to get too close to you. I always want to be your fan. I'm your friend, but, you know, I don't want to get too close. So, yeah.
That's pretty cool that you've got his number in your mobile phone.
That's a New York story. You know?
I'll just get that off you after this interview, Sean. Thanks very much. Now, back to your music, because you are a composer, and that means that you not only create music for yourself, but you ask musicians to come along and play your music as well. And you'd say that you make music for the dance hall or the dance club, I suppose.
Yeah.
And sometimes on your scores, you've got things that say, you play this fiercely funky, which is a pretty cool way of kind of describing music. I'm wondering how you get a classical musician to go with you on that.
Well, I'm bringing a culturally specific tradition now to classical music. Every note is written out, but I am asking you not to play dolce, and not to play con moto, and not to play a pastoral symphony, but to play like Prince, fiercely funky. And, you know, as the music grows and as I get older and as the reputation grows, so too will the tradition.
You've mentioned Prince just then and also Philip Glass, who are great influences for you. But this album, your last album, also influenced by Shostakovich to a degree.
Sure.
They seem like they'd be miles apart, but they're not in your world. How do you gel them together?
Again, as a part of classical music's tradition, Brahms, Akagim, Palestrina, even Shostakovich, they all used folk music from their own country and from other countries. Stravinsky, that's a wonderful example. So I think composers are always doing that. You know, we're always kind of looking outside of the classical music conventional box and saying, okay, how can we rewrite this? You know, it's about remixing, actually. You know, ultimately, it really can't be about concerts and ticket sales and notoriety and fame, for me. Ultimately, it needs to be about not the musical function of my music, but the social function of my music. I really do believe that music can change my world and the world around me. So, you know, the concert will be one thing, but I'm interested in the conversations that will happen before and after. Yeah, and I mean that sincerely. So thank you for this conversation.
No worries. I think it's a good mission to have, in fact.
Thank you.
I'm full of puns. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
And if you missed out on DBR in Melbourne, don't worry, you can still catch them at next year's Adelaide Festival.